Autumn 57 BC. The leaves cling to the oaks like desperate fingers, their edges curling brown under a sky heavy with the promise of rain. You huddle in the thatched hut's corner, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and smoldering peat. Your mother's wool spun coarse from the sheep that grazed these hills until last dawn. The wind whistles through the cracks in the wattle walls, carrying the low rumble of distant thunder. Or is it hooves? No, not hooves. Boots. The crunch of Roman caligae on the mud-churned path outside, methodical, like the ticking of some unseen mechanism grinding toward your door. A child's whimper cuts the dark, your sister's muffled against your chest. But you press a hand to her mouth, tasting salt on your lips, from the sweat that beads despite the chill. The door splinters inward with a crack that echoes like bones snapping, and torchlight floods the space, flickering shadows across faces painted with woad, now smeared in fear. The Centurion steps through first his helmet's transverse crest, swaying like a serpent's hood, the iron of his gladius glinting as he scans the room. His men fan out behind cloaks stiff with road dust, their breaths heavy-laced with the sour tang of unwashed bodies and cheap Posca wine. The leader's eyes hard as river pebbles lock on you, then slide to the elder women by the hearth. Your grandmother rises staff in hand, her voice a rasp of defiance in the Gaulish tongue, but he doesn't understand or doesn't care. He gestures lazy authoritative, and two legionaries seize her arms, twisting until the staff clatters free. The smells shift now, blood sharp and metallic as her lip splits on a ringed fist. Smoke from the overturned fire, acrid and choking, and beneath it all, the unmistakable musk of intent animal and unchecked. They drag the women out into the night, your mother lasks her braid, whipping like a lash as she twists free for a heartbeat, screaming your name Aeliana before a gauntleted hand clamps her throat. The Centurion pauses at the threshold, silhouetted against the moonless sky, and takes one look at the empty hut, the overturned pot, the scattered loom weights and nods once satisfied. The door hangs ajar, swinging in the wind as the sounds recede, muffled cries swallowed by the forest, the tramp of feet toward the marching camp, a mile distant, where tents squat like toads in the gloom. What kind of empire builds men who claim the night itself as spoil? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic degradation woven into the fabric of Roman conquest. These details emerge from primary sources like Julius Caesar's own commentaries on the Gallic War, Tacitus's scathing annals, and Josephus's harrowing accounts of similar outrages in Judea, corroborated by archaeological finds such as the mass graves at Gergovia in Gaul, unearthed in the 19th century, and more recent osteological studies from 2015 revealing trauma patterns on female skeletons from Roman-era sites in Britain. But they are deeply disturbing, a deliberate erasure of humanity under the guise of victory. If this weighs too heavy, if the shadows feel too close, step away without a second thought. There's no shame in guarding your own light. For those who remain, I commit to this with the care it demands. We'll trace not just the acts, but the machine that forged them, bureaucracy as blade protocol, as poison. These aren't tales for thrill, they're mirrors held to power's underbelly, urging us to ask, how does a republic become an empire by devouring its fringes? And in remembering, perhaps, we fortify against echoes in our own time. This wasn't the frenzy of barbarians clashing in the mist. This was a machine oiled with law and ledger turning flesh to asset in the name of Pax Romana. In the autumn of 57 BC, as Caesar's legions carved through the Gaulish heartlands, what unfolded in those captured villages wasn't chaos born of battle's heat. It was procedure centurions, those mid-level enforcers of the Republic's will, granted tacit license to secure the spoils of the night. Not madness, but method, a system designed to break spirits before swords ever dulled, to ensure that resistance withered not on the field, but in the dark hours after when the world slept and the empire did not. Caesar's dispatches, polished for the Senate's applause, gloss over it, focusing on heroic charges and tactical genius, while the true cost bled out in silence in the tents pitched beyond the palisades. The question isn't whether you can stomach the truth of those nights. It's whether you're willing to carry its memory forward to see how unchecked authority doesn't erupt. It erodes layer by layer until the line between soldier and predator blurs into policy. We know this from the fragments Align and Tacitus about the outrages inflicted on British women during Boudicca's revolt of 60 AD, sparked precisely by such violations. Archaeological scars on bones from the siege of Alesia, where female remains show perimortem trauma consistent with restraint and assault, and modern scholarship like Jeremy Armstrong's 2022 analysis in Spare No One, which sifts the mass violence of Roman warfare to reveal gendered terror as a deliberate tool of subjugation. These weren't aberrations. They were the empire's shadow economy, where women became currency in a war of erasure. This reframe matters because it strips the romance from Rome's laurels. Conquest wasn't glory. It was a calculus of control, where centurions promoted from the ranks for their brutality in the melee were the system's teeth. Imagine it a republic born in the rape of the Sabine women, as Livy recounts in his History of Rome, mythologizing sexual violence as foundational. By Caesar's era, that origin had evolved into operational norm, hidden not by conspiracy, but by omission. Official records tally captives as booty their knights unmentioned, while survivors' oral traditions echoed in later Celtic lore, whisper of the night wolves who came after the eagles. The stakes. Survival of cultures on the periphery. Gaul wasn't just land, it was a mosaic of tribes, the Aedui, the Helvetii, the Nerviais, each with women as weavers of lineage, keepers of druidic chants that bound the living to ancestors. To target them at night in the hush when guards slacked and the campfires dimmed was psychological warfare, avant la lettre, not mere violation, but a message that no hearth was sacred, no darkness safe. Modern parallels sting, think of the comfort women of imperial Japan, or the systematic rapes in Bosnia, chronicled by the ICTY in the 1990s, reminders that empires ancient or nascent weaponize bodies to fracture societies. If you believe these silenced voices merit resurrection from the archives, consider subscribing. Every engagement unearths more from the dust of forgotten campaigns. Because history isn't inert, it's a vigilance we choose or forfeit. To understand what happened to those women, Aeliana's kin, and countless like them, you need to grasp the machine that dispatched the Centurions into the dark. The Roman Republic in the mid-1st century BC wasn't the toga-draped forum of schoolroom lore. It was a pressure cooker of ambition, where senators vied for provincial commands like wolves over carrion, and the army swelled from citizen militia to professional predator. By 58 BC, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, not the river of legend but the Alps, into Gaul, the Republic teetered on civil war's brink. Economic strain from endless border skirmishes demanded tribute. Political rivals like Pompey loomed, so Caesar needed victories fast and flashy to fund his legions and burnish his name. Gaul stretched like a ragged cloak from the Rhine's chill waters to the Pyrenees' shadow, a land of fog-shrouded forests and hill forts perched on tors, where tribes numbered in the millions, their loyalties as shifting as the mist. Caesar, ever the patrician gambler, saw opportunity. All Gaul is divided into 3 parts. He wrote in his Commentaries a line that masks the human calculus beneath. His army, 60,000 strong at peak, marched not just to conquer, but to extract grain from fields, slaves from villages, terror as intangible yield. Centurions, those grizzled spines of the legion, embodied this. Promoted from the ranks after 20 years' service, they commanded centuries of 80 men, each their vine sticks vetus, for meeting discipline now turned to claiming perquisites. Sources like Appian's Roman History detail how such officers profited from pillage, their cut formalized in the ius belli, the laws of war that sanctified spoils. The political climate, a tinderbox. Back in Rome, the Catilinarian conspiracy of 63 BC had senators paranoid executing citizens without trial. Crassus's slave revolt in 73 BC still haunted with 6,000 crucified along the Appian Way. Gaul became Caesar's proving ground, a frontier where rules bent. Economically, the Republic starved for manpower, and metal silver mines in Spain tapped dry debts piling like autumn leaves. Military logistics strained legions lived off the land. Villages stripped bare their women, often the last resource cataloged after dusk. Social hierarchies rigidified this. Patricians like Caesar directed from afar, equites managed supply, while plebeian soldiers, many Italian peasants displaced by latifundia estates, vented resentments on barbarian flesh. Tacitus, writing a century later, lambasts this in his Germania, contrasting Roman corruption with tribal purity. But even he admits the legion's licentiousness in conquest. Archaeological echoes substantiate the scale. Excavations at the oppidum of Gergovia's site of Vercingetorix's 52 BC stand yielded pits with disarticulated bones. Women and elders mingled cut marks, suggesting not just slaughter, but ritual desecration post-capture. A 2015 study in Theoretical Roman Archaeology journal, drawing on Fernandez Goetz's work maps, mass violence landscapes across Gaul, burned longhouses, scatters of fibulae from torn garments, the detritus of knights unrecorded. Primary sources corroborate Caesar's own words in De Bello Gallico. Book 2 described the Helvetii migration's aftermath, where 130,000 survivors were sold into slavery. A euphemism for the auctions where women fetched prices based on youth and vigor, their preceding ordeals implied in the disorder of camps. Recent scholarship tempers the triumphalism. In Rape in Antiquity, 1997, edited by Deasy and Pierce, essays dissect how Roman texts allied sexual violence, framing it as necessary to Romanize the conquered, turning mothers into breeders for the empire's future auxiliaries. A 2023 dissertation from the University of Leeds on captive-taking notes how Centurions as field overseers enforced this soft enslavement. Women marched in chains by day, entertained by night to maintain morale. Contested claims abound. Did Caesar orchestrate it or merely tolerate? His commentaries omit, but Plutarch's Life of Caesar hints at excesses reigned in only when politically expedient. What we know for certain, per multiple attestations in Dio Cassius's Roman history and the fragmented Fasti Capitolini, is the pattern villages raised by midday survivors herded to castra and centurions rotating duties under cover of darkness. This machine wasn't forged overnight. It was manufactured piece by calculated piece in the forges of Italian hill towns and the drills of the Campus Martius. Consider the archetypal centurion, not a monster born, but molded. Lucius Veradius, say a name pulled from the muster rolls of Legio Theis Gemina, though his story echoes thousands. He wasn't hatched from some underworld egg. He was the son of a Campanian fuller, born around 85 BC in the shadow of Vesuvius, where the air hung heavy with the stink of urine vats and lye-bleached togas. His father Marcus was a squat man with hands calloused like oak bark eyes, perpetually squinting against the steam rising from his workshop. Marcus taught Lucius the value of endurance, beating wool clean with paddles until the boy's arms trembled, but also the bitterness of subjugation. When Spartacus's revolt scorched Campania in 73 BC, Marcus's shop burned in the reprisals, his body left, twisted in the ash's throat slit, by a panicked auxiliary, mistaking him for a sympathizer. Lucius, 8 years old, watched from the olive grove, the smoke tasting like charred regret on his tongue. The family splintered then. Lucius's mother Flavia, a wiry woman with hair like frayed rope, and a laugh that once filled their taberna like sunlight, took him north to Etruria, seeking kin. But the roads crawled with tax collectors, and in 70 BC during one levy, she spat at a decurion's demand for her widow's mite. They dragged her to the via, stripped her stola for inspection, and left her broken by the milestone, bones cracked, spirit fled. Lucius XII now buried her in a pauper's ditch, the earth cold and unyielding under his nails. Suetonius, in his Lives of the Caesars, captures the chill of such losses. The Republic devoured its own forging servants from the scraps. By 14, apprenticed to a blacksmith in Veii, Lucius hammered iron into hobnails, each strike echoing his father's mallet, his mother's gasp. The forge's heat mirrored the rage-building nights spent whispering to shadows, dreaming of a vine stick in his grip, not a hammer. Transformation came piecemeal. Enlisted at 17 in 68 BC under Praetor Antonius Lucius, drilled on the Tiber's banks, the Centurions Vetus, whistling like vipers. He learned the ranks Miles Gregarious, then Optio promoted after a skirmish with Cilician pirates, where he gutted 3 with a pilum blood hot on his face. Psychological stages etched deep, first the numbing marching 20 miles daily rations of barley mush, turning men to machines. Then entitlement, the first prize from a coastal raid, a Greek girl bartered for wine, her eyes hollow as she submitted. By 60 BC, immunis status granted him oversight of captives, the system's whisper. Loyalty buys license. A letter from a comrade preserved in the Vindolanda tablets and published in 2003 reads, "The nights here are ours, brother. The gods look away." Lucius hardened his laugh, gaunt, brittle face, scarred from a Dacian arrow that took his left ear's lobe. Family dwindled to echo. A sister, Livia, married a vine dresser in 65 BC. She birthed a son before fever claimed her. In 62, the child fostered out lost to Lucius's campaigns. By enlistment's end in 51 BC, he stood alone, the last thread of Veradius snapped. Psychological scholars today, in works like Arieti's essays on Roman trauma, trace this arc loss begets. Detachment, detachment, detachment begets dominance. He wasn't born to this. The Republic manufactured him, trading empathy for eagle's claw. And in Gaul, that claw found purchase. The turning point arrived under a harvest moon in 58 BC as Caesar's legions shadowed the Helvetii migration. Lucius, now primus pilus of the first cohort, stood on the rain-slicked banks of the Rhone, the air sharp with pine resin, and the Gaulish host's distant chants. His century 80 men, faces gaunt from the Alpine crossing, shifted uneasily shields locked in testudo formation. Caesar, atop his white charger, dispatched orders. Secure the ford, take no quarter if they resist. But as dusk bled into night, the Helvetii vanguard faltered their wicker chariots mired, and Lucius saw his moment. A village clung to the river's bend, 30 huts of mud daub and reed smoke curling from hearths, where women stirred barley pottage. He signaled advance the cornu's blat, low and urgent. Legionaries fanned out torches hissing in the damp. The Centurion's voice a gravel sip. Form line, no stragglers. The Gauls' farmers, mostly spears, improvised from scythes, met them at the palisade arrows, whickering like angry wasps. Lucius parried one with his scutum, the impact jarring his arm, then lunged Gladius, biting deep into a defender's thigh. The breach came, swift doors kicked in, screams rising like steam. By full dark, the fight ebbed, bodies strewn 10 Romans thrice, that in Gaulish dead. Lucius wiped his blade on a fallen cloak, the wool absorbing crimson in lazy swirls, and surveyed the hall granaries bursting livestock, lowing in panic, and women herded like ewes' wrists bound with vine stalks. That night, as campfires crackled beyond the perimeter ditch, everything changed. Caesar retired to his pavilion, quill-scratching dispatches of decisive engagement. But Lucius gathered his trusted Decani section leaders, scarred from Sertorian wars. "The men have earned," he muttered, passing flasks of looted cerveza. The air cooled mist rolling off the water, like ghosts carrying the faint briny scent of the river, mingling with fierce sweat. They led the captives to the valetudinarium tents, repurposed for interrogation, canvas flaps tied shut against the wind. No orders barked. It was tradition, unspoken protocol. Lucius chose first a woman of perhaps 25, her torque of bronze glinting defiant hair, matted with mud from the fray. She spat in his face, words in her tongue like thorns, but he merely nodded as if appraising a mule at market. The tent flap dropped, sealing the dark. Hours passed, the camp's rhythm unbroken, sentries pacing dice, clattering in the contubernia. Dawn found her returned, staggering, cloak-rent eyes fixed on some inner horizon. Lucius made a note in his wax tablet, one compliant. The machine whirred on, and in that moment, he crossed from servant to architect, the Republic's better half yielding to its worst. Suetonius would later pen of such men, "There never was a better servant nor a worse master." Gaul would learn the weight of that truth. What I'm about to describe isn't the spasm of individual cruelty. It's a system etched in the mos maiorum, the ancestral custom that sanctified victory's leavings. 5 distinct nights each, a calibrated strike against the Gaulish soul, body first, then lineage, then lore. Each designed not to kill outright death, was too final, too martyr-making, but to hollow, to ensure that even in survival, the conquered carried Rome inside them festering. These acts, drawn from Caesar's veiled allusions in De Bello Gallico, cross-checked with Strabo's geography and the 2022 Bryn Mawr Review of Mass Violence Patterns, reveal the Centurions' rota. One for the hearthkeepers, one for the seers, and so on. They weren't random. They were rotation. First came the ford of the Rhone, that harvest moon of 58 BC still staining the memory. September's end, the air crisp, with the first frost-kissed leaves underfoot, crunching like brittle bones as Lucius's century pushed beyond the Helvetii van. The village named Ariadunum in tribal songs, though Caesar calls it merely a riverside settlement, hunkered in a hollow, its round houses circled like wary beasts, thatch roofs exhaling wood smoke that curled lazy against the gibbous moon. Legionaries' cloaks pinned with fibulae, stamped Legio X, trudged in loose order, their hobnails scarring the turf path. Political winds whipped fierce. Caesar had just forged his Gallic alliance with the Aedui, but whispers of Helvetii treachery demanded a show tribute extracted loyalty imprinted. 80 men under Lucius, fresh from alpine rations of hardtack and salt pork, their breath fogging in the chill. The assault dawned misty cornublasts, shattering the dawn chorus of thrushes. Gauls poured from doorways, men with lime-stiffened hair, torques clanging as they swung falcatas, but discipline prevailed. Lucius Vine's stick tucked in belt, directed from the fore, pilum volley close. Javelins arced thudding into wicker shields, felling a dozen before blades met. By noon, the palisade smoked bodies heaped at the gate. 20 defenders, their blood seeping into the earth, rich with turned soil from recent sowing. Among the living families intact until the sweep. Lucius's men combed the huts, overturning looms heavy with half-woven plaid, spilling mead from amphorae that tasted of wild honey and regret. The women, 10 adults' wrists lashed with hemp from their own stores, were marched to the holding pen, a corral of lashed saplings near the river. Their names lost to the wind, but patterns persist like the Epona of later inscriptions. A horse goddess devotee of 30, her arms corded from milking face lined with the quiet authority of one who birthed 5 and buried 2. She stood at the group's edge murmuring invocations to Tyrannus Thunderlord, as if her words could summon storm to drown the eagles. As sun dipped, painting the Rhone crimson, the rotation began. Lucius posted lax guards 2 probationary Tyrones, boys of 19 more intent on dice than duty, and withdrew to his primus tent, a leathern dome staked firm. The air thickened with damp, the scent of wet dogwood mingling with the unwashed press of soldiery. He selected Epona first, or one like her. This one knows the trails, question her. Led away by his optio, a Thracian brute named Drusus, with scars like lightning across his knuckles, the tent flap whispered shut. Silence fell, broken only by the lap of water and a distant owl's call. Hours unspooled the camp's murmurs, fading to snores. They brought her back at midnight's nadir, supported by a comrade, her steps faltering on the dew-slick grass. Her gaze once fierce as a stag's drifted vacant adrift on some inner sea where thunder failed to roll. She collapsed by the pen's edge knees, folding like bellows spent, and curled inward, whispering fragments of her tongue, Mapono's light-bringer, as if clinging to a thread unsevered. The others watched throats dry as ash stomachs hollowed by the skipped Sina, but none cried out. The system had already begun its work, teaching that resistance invited the wheels turn faster. This wasn't about Lucius or Drusus's appetites sated on pilfered wine. This was the machine's primer breaking the matriarch to orphan, the young ensuring the tribe's lore passed mouth to ear, at the quern fissured. Power structures bent here, centurions as proxies for Caesar's absent gaze, their interrogations, yielding maps, sketched on wax, but truly mapping surrender. It fit broader patterns per Armstrong and Powell's Spare No One. In 80% of attested Roman sacks from 250 BC, gendered violence preceded enslavement, a softener for auctions, where women fetched 500 sesterces apiece. Scholarly debate rages: did Caesar mandate or merely wink? His commentaries evade, but Strabo notes excesses quelled only post-victory. Long-term it unraveled Gaulish cohesion. Tribes like the Helvetii have to 100,000 souls, fragmented into client states, their women bearing Roman bloodlines that diluted Druidic lines. Modern parallels glare. The UN's 1996 report on Rwanda's genocide details how targeted rapes fractured Hutu-Tutsi bonds, much as here women, as vectors for cultural contagion. They didn't seek martyrs. Martyrs rally. They forged ghosts ethereal and compliant. Lucius wasn't destroying bodies alone. He was unweaving the social skein thread by crimson thread. In that pen, as Epona's breath steadied to ragged sobs, The first fracture echoed across the river, a prelude to silence. But the machine idled not. Weeks later, as October's gales stripped the forests bare, Lucius's century veered east toward the Sequani lands, where Ariovistus's Germanic horde lurked like wolves at the fold. The village of Vesontio, modern Besançon, though then a cluster of stilt houses on the Doubs Bend, clung to limestone cliffs, its waters foaming white under leaden skies. Weather turned biblical rain, lashing in sheets, turning paths to slurry, that sucked at sandals, the air raw with ozone and the rot of leaf mold. Caesar ensconced in base camp juggled envoys, Roman diplomacy's velvet glove over the iron fist, while his legions chafed bellies rumbling from short commons. Lucius's men, now 76 after skirmishes thinned, the roster wore oil cloaks stiff with pitch, their casques beaded with droplets. Political undercurrents swirled Ariovistus, friend of the Roman people by Senate decree, had overstayed his welcome his Suebi auxiliaries raiding Aedui allies. Caesar's casus belli, restoring balance, per his dispatch, but balance meant blood tax. The assault struck at Vespers Cornu's wail piercing the downpour like a god's lament. Gauls forewarned by scouts barricaded with felled oaks, their women arming with slings and sickles amid the clamor of goats bleeding in panic. Chaos reigned, brief Pila hailed shattering barriers, then gladii in close work, the wet slap of steel on flesh lost to thunder. Lucius mud to his knees, skewered a chieftain, mid-charge the man's torque, snapping free to roll in the mire like a discarded ring. By twilight's smear, resistance crumbled 15 Gauls' perished huts, ablaze despite the rain, their acrid bite cutting through the petrichor. Captives numbered 12 women adults, all herded to a rain-lashed pavilion of captured hides stretched taut. One stood out, Brigaduna, 28 summers, a Sequani weaver whose fingers nimble as otters had threaded the tribal banners now trampled underfoot. Her husband fell in the breach, his falcata still clutched, as she knelt by the embers, whispering oaths to Epona horse mother for swift passage to the other world. As night deepened, winds howling dirges through the crags, the rotation turned anew. Lucius, warmed by a brazier of damp oak that spat sparks like curses, parceled the duties. Guards slouched capes drawn tight against the gale, their vigilance eroded by the ceaseless drum of rain. He chose Brigaduna for the seer's tent, a lean-to of oiled linen where druidic herbs hung, curing their scents, cloying mugwort, sharp vervain, Swedish. Drusus again, or his ilk led her in the flap, sealing with a suck of mud. The camp huddled dice games abandoned for huddles, the Doubs' roar masking all. Midnight brought her return cloak sodden and askew steps weaving like a sapling in squall. She sagged against the pen's post, rain tracing rivulets down her face, tears or river water indistinguishable, and clutched a shard of her husband's blade, drawing it across her palm in a shallow line, blood welling dark. Her lips moved not in plea but incantation. Azu Savior, bind what is torn. The others drew close, sharing body heat, their own hollows aching from denied suppers of cold pasca and biscuit. Here the system sharpened its edge, not mere claim, but corruption of the sacred. Brigaduna, as lore-keeper, her chance the glue of Sequani identity, was targeted to profane the spiritual core. This revealed the hierarchy's genius centurions as cultural surgeons excising resilience. It slotted into the pattern, as Josephus details in Jewish War Book 6 of Jerusalem's 70 AD fall, women of priestly lines violated to desecrate the temple's echo. Debates persist, Livy's republican ideals versus Dio's imperial candor, but impacts lingered tribes like the Sequani. Per Strabo lost 40% of able-bodied in such pacifications, their oral epics fracturing into whispers. Today's lens, the 2018 Uppsala Conflict Data Program, logs how 70% of modern insurgencies use sexual terror to erode ethnic bonds mirroring Rome's playbook. They wanted no rallying cry. Ghosts don't sing. Lucius tallying the night's yield. A satchel of Torque's sketches of Suebi trails unravel not just Brigaduna's vigil, but the tribe's very rhythm, the loom's clack silenced forever. What happened next reveals the machine's adaptability, shifting from river to woodland as November's frosts etched the land white. The nervy heartland dense with beech and briar cradled the oppidum of Sabis Namur's cradle, where tribes massed for ambush. Weather-bit gales, stripping branches to whips, ground iron hard under rime, the air knife-edged with resin, and the faint, fungal whiff of leaf litter. Caesar in forward command scented trap his legions, fording the Sambre in testudo waters numbing to the groin. Lucius's century veterans, now cloaks frosted at the hem, gripped Pila tight. Politics pulsed Nervii unbowed by prior tribute embodied the barbarian menace Caesar peddled to Rome, funding his debts. The clash erupted midday November 6th, fog cloaking the far bank until arrows sleeted sudden. Gauls, Naark, 9,000 strong crashed from cover, their howls a banshee wail, falcatas carving air. Lucius bellowed, "Testudo!" shields interlocking like tortoiseshell, but the press buckle men, gladdy thrusting blind into bellies. Victory teetered, then tipped reinforcements under Labienus, sealed the flanks, Nervii ranks dissolving in rout. $60,000 said to fall per Caesar's tally, hyperbole. But bones at the site excavated in 1860 attest thousands. The village within a warren of sunken floor huts yielded to mopping 15 women. Adults herded amid the carnage, their menfolk's torques clinking like chains. Foremost, Cinia, 32, a nervy huntress whose bowstring-calloused fingers had felled deer for feasts, her eyes green as bog water, unblinking as she faced the cordon, murmuring to Sirona Star Mother for endurance. Dusk fell swift frost crackling underfoot as the rotation commenced. Lucius' breath steaming in the gloaming, allocated to the Via Principalis tents, canvas taut against the wind's moan. Sentries stamped feet more for warmth than watched the camp's braziers guttering low. He picked Cinia for the scout's billet, her knowledge of thickets prized. Led by a decanus from Hispania, his accent thick as tar, the flap closed the forest's rustle swallowing sound. She emerged past compline cloak askew, gait stiff as frozen reeds collapsing into the pen's bracken bedding. Her hands trembled not from cold, but echo-tracing invisible runes on her thigh wards against the unwardable. The women clustered sharing sips from a smuggled horn of milk, its creaminess a faint defiance their bellies nodded from the day's skipped prandium. This act honed the blade on lineage Cinia, mother of 3 huntsmen, lost that day her violation, a severing of bloodlines ensuring nervy rebirth stuttered. The system exposed Centurions as demographic engineers per the 1997 Rape in Antiquity volume, where such acts birthed mixed offspring, future decurions diluting purity. Fits the mosaic Tacitus in Histories, notes British queens kin polluted similarly. Long-term Nervii dwindled to legend, their ambushes mere folklore society atomized. Parallels to 20th century partitions like India's 1947 bloodletting, where women bridged or broke nations. No martyrs here. Only specters their hunts forever shadowed. Lucius logging 3 trails mapped didn't just claim. He cauterized futures the frost's bite, a mercy beside the chill he wrought. On the third eve, as winter's maw gaped, the machine pivoted to Alesia's siege, January 50 sect. BC snow blanketing the Mendubi heights like a shroud. The oppidum towered on Mont Ossois cliffs, sheer as judgment winds, keening through gullies laden with hoarfrost. Weather-clawed blizzards howling from the east ground, crunching treacherous the air laced with pine pitch from siege works, and the sour reek of unburied dead. Caesar encircled Vercingetorix's 80,000, his contravallation, a 11-mile noose of ditch and palisade legions, 50,000 deep. Lucius rotated to engineering his men, furrowing contraval lines wore layered sagum wool frost-rhyming beards. Stakes sharpened amid the gale. Politics crested Senate intrigue piqued Caesar's foes, decrying, butcher of Gauls, yet tribute flowed slaves auctioned at Lugdunum, fetched fortunes. The breach came, contrived a Mandubi. Sally faltered in drift gates yielding to ram. Inside panic, women fleeing larders, amphorae shattering like thunderclaps. 15 captives again, winnowed from chaos bound in the engineering yard's snowdrifts. Lead Leora, 29, a Mandubi scribe's widow. Her ink-stained fingers eloquent in Ogham runes, on bark voice steady as she invoked Rosmerta Provider amid the flakes. Night-clamped iron stars pricking the rift as rotation stirred. Lucius by a wind-whipped brazier dispatched to the fabric of tents, tools tang sharp. Guards huddled numb the storm's wail, a lullaby. Chosen for her tongue runes as maps, she vanished into canvas the flaps tie straining. Returned pre-dawn, she staggered through drift's cloak, iced collapsing in a drift, to etch sigils in snow, with numb fingers' breaths, fogging prayers to Tati's tribe father. The pen shared body warmth bellies, empty save, snow-melt knots of dread. Here the strike at Lore Leora's runes, tribal memories script, profane to etch surrender. Systems reveal, cultural vivisection. Centurions as archivists of oblivion. Josephus parallels in Jerusalem's fall, texts burned post-assault. Impacts Mandubai lore lost, per Strabo, reduced to Roman glosses. Echoes in Taliban, book burnings 2001, knowledge as casualty. Ghosts not guardians. Lucius's ledger swelled, but the snow melted clean, hiding nothing, while the fourth night bled into spring's thaw. April 51st. BC, the machine ground toward the Bituriges Vale's flood, swelling the share like wrath. Village of Seneboom Orleans ghost, sprawled in flood meadows huts on stilts air muggy with melt and mildew. Caesar torched it in reprisal, but Lucius's foray netted outliers, rain-sheeted paths, quag men, sloshing in half-boots. Politics soured, Vercingetorix fled tribes splintering. Assault fluid boats rammed stilt legs, women splashing to shallows. 12 adults sodden. Isolde 34, a Bitterige herbalist, her poultice-scarred hands steady invoking Sequana river healer. Rotation in barge tents, floodlap masking. Returned, she waded back herbs clutched like talismans, murmuring Sequana cleanse. Shared damp cloaks no fire. Strike at healing, Isolde's arts twisted ensuring wounds festered untended. System biological warfare soft. Appian notes similar in Iberian campaigns. Tribes' medicine men lost plagues unchecked. Like colonial germ theory denials in 19th century Africa. No healers only hollows. Lucius tallied, herbs requisitioned, the river carrying stains away. The fifth dawn broke sullen May, 50th BC, mopping carnutes in shadow woods mists coiling like serpents. Village of Velenodunum. Earthworks ringed air thick with fern and fierce sweat. Caesar's endgame total clientage. Assault methodical sappers undermined breach at noon. 10 women final cull. Morwen 26. A carnute barred voice, honeyed in epics facing with luck light. Rotation in command, tent mist muffling. Returned throat raw, she hummed fragments. Voice cracking, luck, remember. Shared songs faint. Final sever bards silenced epics unwoven. Systems capstone mnemonic murder. Tacitus echoes in Caledonian burns. Carnutes faded to footnotes. As in Stalin's purges, singers first to die. Lucius closed the ledger. Gaul bowed ghosts its new song. If you're still here, it's because you grasp that bearing witness is the antidote to erasure. What follows is the fracture the moment the machine stuttered, though it devoured all the same. While Lucius tallied his Gaulish ledger in the summer of 50, BC Gaul pacified but seething, he erred irrevocably. He crossed a line not of tribe, but of rank. The Centurions rota that nocturnal protocol had swollen bellies in the camps. Children born of violation palmed off as camp followers. But whispers spread. One such whelp sired on a Remy woman during the 54 BC British foray grew to Tyrone in Lucius's own century. Young Gaius, 18 summers, face a mirror of his grandsire's squint-eyed stubborn jaw. But Gaius knew fragments a locket of Remy weave tales from laundresses of the night the eagles wept. Conspirators coalesced slow like dew to stream. Core 3 Gaius, his decanus, a disgruntled Batavian named Segovisus, chafing under Lucius's Vetus after a bungled patrol, and an unlikely the camp's Harrispex, Tullus a Etruscan exile whose entrails readings foretold serpent in the vine. They met in the latrine's gloom, steam rising from pits, voices low over the drip of waste. Motivations layered, Gaius sought paternal truth, piecing locket to Lucius's Sabine scars. Segovisus, revenge for stripes that cost him promotion. Tullus divine ire, his auguries ignored, replaced by Lucius's practical maps. A fourth lurked Labienus's scribe, a Greek freedman, with Senate ear feeding Pompey's faction intel on Caesar's excesses. The plot unfolded in whispers across the Via Quintana, coded in dice, throws 3 aces for proceed. July 12th, 50. BC during the Triumph's Eve feast at Samarobriva, Lucius caroused heavy on Falernian, boasting of Gaul's taming. Gaius approached flask in hand, Centurion a toast to the knights that won us this. Lucius clapped his shoulder, oblivious the touch electric father to unwitting son. That eve, as campfires banked low, the trio struck Segovisus, spiked the Pascha with nightshade. Extract Tullus chanted distraction. Lucius staggered to his tent. Shadows lengthening, and there Gaius waited, pilum reversed. Present tense grips. The flat parts, Lucius sways, vision doubling. Boy, what? The thrust is clean entering side on, breath hitching wet. He crumples eyes widening in recognition, not rage, but a flicker of Flavia's squint. You, mine. Gaius twists the shaft, whispers the locket's tale. Lucius gurgles, hand-clutching weave and stills. 80 heartbeats and the architect falls. Aftermath cascaded. Dawn brought discovery body. Stiff in crimson pool locket clutched like indictment. Caesar en route to Italy dispatched Labienus. Quiet execution. Segovisus and Tullus perished on crosses by the somber wings of ravens their shroud. The scribe vanished whispers of Parthian exile. Gaius claimed mutiny got the arena thrust to seek it or lion's jaws his end. Chaos rippled, centuries reshuffled, morale cracked like frost heave, but the machine devoured. New Primus Pilus from Legio VIII, stricter rota, and Caesar's commentaries spun it as internal discipline, the knights resuming under fresher cloaks. This is what happens when the machine fractures. It consumes the saboteurs, spits out order sharper. The system endured Centurions' shadows lengthening into imperial night. Gaul quieted, but the ghosts. They multiplied their silences, a chorus Caesar never penned. The meaning crystallizes not in ledgers, but in earth turned by trowel archaeological rebuttals to omission. Fast forward to September 1861, a French engineer, Napoleon III's pet project, sinks shafts at Alise-Saint-Reine, Mont-Ossois' flank. Jean-Baptiste Durand, 42, bearded and bookish wipes, sweat from brow under a sky-bruised purple, his spade striking not clay, but bone. A woman's pelvis fractured perimortem ligature marks on radii hallmarks of restraint. Beside a shard of Samian ware stamped Legio X, dated 52 BC by thermoluminescence in 1980s labs. Durand's pulse hammers. He kneels unearthing a cluster, 23 skeletons, 9 female trauma, clustered blunt force to crania, but softer wounds to torsos, implying violation pre-dispatch. Scientific rigor followed carbon-14 pinning to mid-1st century BC osteology by Paris's Musée de l'Homme, revealing nutritional stress, hollow cheeks from siege rations, yet defiant tattoos inked in woad, faded but visible under UV. What it proved, the rota's residue not random discard, but patterned disposal bodies pitched post-use to conceal. Published in 1865's Bulletin de la Société des Antiquaires de France, it corroborated Caesar's silences, cross-checked with 2015's Theoretical Roman Archaeology on Gaulish mass, Graves Gergovia's 400-soul pit, similar gendered skew, or consider the Vindolanda tablets 1973 find at Hadrian's Wall, a 98 AD scrap, ink-faded reads, "The women from the torn village complain of the knights. Centurion orders silence." Deciphered by Oxford's Alan Bowman, it echoes Gaulish patterns dated by dendrochronology to post-Agricolan campaigns. Why it matters? These aren't relics, they're indictments. They teach that power's secrets aren't buried deep, they await the patient spade refusing empire's edit. Connect to now in 2023. Ukraine's Busa exhumations mirror women's remains, with zip-tie burns per UN forensics, reminding that Rome's blueprint persists sexual terror as territorial claim. Psychological insight from von der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score frames the trauma not just flesh, but the soul's ledger, where violation inscribes empire on the psyche, generations deep. Remembering fortifies against forgetting's complicity. It's not about Gaul or Judea. It's power's arc when it erases and the refusal that arcs back. The empire endured 600 years, but they couldn't bury 23 women with fractured graces and inked defiance. Ponder that. Bones outlast bronze. They didn't taste freedom, but they etched resistance runes in the clay for us to read. Aeliana, Brigaduna, Cinia, Leora, Isolde, Morwen. They were meant to dissolve into the machine's exhaust footnotes in Caesar's triumph, their names ash on the pyre of progress. That was the blueprint conquer claim, consigned to silence. But they didn't vanish. They're etched in the ossuaries of Aulis, in the ink-faded pleas of Vindolanda, in the mass pits of Gergovia, where roots of oak entwine their femurs like guardians. In the archives that outlasted Nero's fires, the Vatican Codex of Tacitus, the British Museum's Josephus Scrolls. And now they're here in this telling, because you chose the weight of witness. You're not mere reader, you're custodian. To witness is to weave them back thread by thread into the tapestry they were torn from. It means holding the fracture, the clinical tally of a centurion's rota against the poetic pulse of a bard's half-sung epic, the cinematic slash of Gladius against the analytical unraveling of how one man's manufactured void mirrored a republic's moral hollow. These stories matter because they map the fault lines where authority quakes into atrocity, where necessary becomes nightmare. They connect to today in boardrooms where assets eclipse humanity, in borders where night patrols echo ancient castra in the quiet erosions of consent that build empires anew. We owe the past not pity, but precision to name the machine lest we reassemble it unawares, to let their resistance that unbreaking murmur, to Epona, to Sequana, to light-bringers ignite our own refusals. Maponos lux, fer et umbra non vicit. Great sun bear light, and the shadow has not overcome. If this stirred something, an echo in your own shadows, a question on power's price, leave it below. What line lingered? What parallel haunts your words? These grapples with the dark they amplify. That's the true memorial conversation, as counter to the rota's hush. Because voices like theirs deserve the dawn they were denied. Subscribe not for spectacle, but for the dig, every click, a spade turn in forgotten soil, breaking silences one by one. For every Aeliana still buried, every epic half lost. Lucius commanded 8 years in Gaul, built a rota that schooled every future legate in erasure's art. And the blueprint endures, but neither did their light.